Small island states, regardless of their development, all stand to lose from climate change, as we've seen from this video. Their impact is negligible. However, there's a bit of good hope. The hope is in the track record on the blue economy. This, we believe, speaks for itself. To showcase this impressive record, we have a panel of experts whose field of work deals directly with or indirectly with sustainable blue economy activity, and more importantly, the partnership method of doing things. My name is Gabriella Cassola, and I am the Deputy Director of the 3CL Foundation. And this morning, afternoon, or early morning, I will be the moderator for this session. By way of housewarming procedures, may I take this occasion to remind you all that you may make use of the Q&A function, which is at the bottom of your screen. We shall be taking some questions after the second presentation and after the last presentation, as well as a fully fledged part right after the end of all the presentations. Kicking off our debate, we have Lucienne Auerbach, who is the project management expert consultant within the European Marine Observation and Data Network. In her current capacity, Julie is managing the EMODnet partnership for China and Europe that aims to ensure effective ocean governance for the conservation and sustainable use of the oceans, including sustainable fisheries, a thriving maritime economy, and healthy oceans and the resources they contain. Julie, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Gabriella. I'm very delighted to be invited here and be a part of today's discussion. Will you be sharing the presentation? Perfect. That's great. Thank you, Gabriella. So today I'm coming to you from the European Marine Observation Data Network, and it's a pleasure to be here today because maybe some or others of you are more or less familiar with this marine data initiative launched by DG Mare. So next slide, please, Gabby. Essentially, we are going to look at an outline of EMODnet so that you can have a sort of a description of what it is essentially. I also want to look at the coverage, and I want to see as well about the partnerships and look at a few key resources in fisheries and aquaculture, if we have time, of course. So just one moment. Everything in order. So next slide, please. So as you may or may not know, it's a long-term European Marine Knowledge Initiative. It's an EU-funded project. Essentially, it's a brokerage service. We have grown to be a very large network of over 130 organizations. Complementary to this service is also the Earth observation service known as Copernicus, in particular the Marine Service. And we deal with data and products, maps from the surface to the seafloor across 7 thematic areas. Next slide, please. So really, it's really just to give you a bit of familiarity with those thematic lots, as we call them. And they range from bathymetry, geology, seabed habitats, physics, chemistry, biology, and human activities. We're dealing with a lot of data, which is incoming from our data providers, as well as data products. Can you change the slide, please? So as you can see, we have a full list of data products per lot. These range from the digital terrain model in bathymetry, which I'll focus on a little bit later, to the seabed habitats map, which is indispensable for reporting obligations and assessment in the EU. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Thank you. So another facility that we have is called the Data Ingestion Facility. This is something that acts as a funnel, if you like, to data that is provided by all sectors. A lot of the data comes from academia, but we have data providers from the public and private sectors, and citizen science as well. And essentially, this is a facility that is to make it easier for data to be ingested. And within this facility, it is treated for Inspire compliance, which is a directive that we have in the EU to harmonize data and to standardize information and make it ready for use. It also has a quality assurance aspect to it as well. Next slide, please. So in order to access, we've just been repatriated under the Europa domain. So you can see the new link there. This is something that happened this week. We're accessible for each portal. As you can see, there's an icon for each portal and also through the central portal. And there is also a catalog facility there. So it depends on if you wish to search firstly through a catalog for any of those thematic data sets or products, or if you prefer a map viewer, depends on your leanings. But what we will be doing from now until the end of next year is to centralize everything into one central portal. So it becomes even easier for the user to use to see the thematic data layers together and thus apply them with more ease. Next slide, please. So in terms of coverage, it is an EU-funded project. It is now going into its fourth phase. As you can see, per phase, we've built up our resolution. The confidence in the data is much greater as well. This is just a screen grab from the physics portal, and you can see that it is global. The density of the data was obviously highest within the European area, but we have pan-European coverage now, and we have a global remit. Gabriella had mentioned the EU-China project, which we're working on with the National Marine Data and Information Service in Tianjin for information along the maritime Silk Route to remove barriers in accessing data which is available, if possible. Next slide, please. I wanted to also say a little bit about the infrastructure of the EMODnet, and it is something that perhaps could be taken up by the small island developing states. Oftentimes it is a huge barrier to get going with the technology, with the training, to even put a centralized database in place. EMODnet, through the physics portal, has facilitated the Southern Ocean Observing System with a host platform through the Undp server, which they use to host their information and to view it with other physics information from around the globe. And this infrastructure is working very well for the SUs, as we call them. So just something to keep in mind, perhaps. Next slide, please. And in terms of partnerships, obviously we have established a very coherent network of stakeholders, and we're a very large community. Copernicus in particular is a service that we are working on several different initiatives. We also, next slide, please. I don't want to take too much time. In terms of the global partnerships, we are also established with the IODE, the International Oceanographic Data Exchange, through their project Ocean Info Hub. And it is something that we are investing ourselves into in the context of the United Nations Decade of Ocean Science. And we are in a very good position to tackle the 7 outcome targets of the SDG 14. Next slide, please. And so to go back a little bit to the European context, being centralized as a portal and also now repatriated, we will be pivotal as EMODnet for the implementation of the European Green Deal, and also in terms of the preparation of data according to the European data strategy, and making sure that the resources which are there are readily findable and made easily accessible to the technical user and the non-technical user. So this is something that's very important to highlight. As I said before, our users come from all levels of proficiency, and it is to make it accessible primarily. Next slide, please. So just to go back to the Copernicus and the EMODnet collaboration, an example of this has been in creating a joint portfolio for the MSFD. Our case study was on the Baltic area, the Baltic Sea case study, and this is something that will be looked at in collaboration with the European Environmental Agency to ensure that it's can be enlarged to all European seas and released online. So we're essentially always going back to how collaborations can add value to what we already have and to make it easier for application so that member states can find and use data for assessment and implementation. Next slide, please. So another example of this collaboration was with the European Aquaculture Technology and Innovation Platform called ETIP. And this, we had 2 workshops in the last months, one for the North Atlantic and the other for the Mediterranean and Black Seas. I have linked them here, and these presentations will be shared as well. So I invite you to take a look at the structure. It was essentially to put stakeholders together and look at best practices to see how aquaculture can be supported, both through the available in situ data as well as through Earth observation information. So in combination, it is a dynamic duo for tackling anything that needs to be tackled. Next slide, please. So let me just, so in terms of key resources, I just wanted to emphasize the fact that EMODnet is in a very good position to ensure that the user has what is needed for SDG 14. There are cross-cutting challenges, and particularly for the SIDs, they are in a precarious situation, and we need to tackle this with already known resources and be able to apply them readily. And the next slide, essentially just some SDGs that we are identifying. Obviously, we're focusing on SDG, but once you have the sustainable development of your blue growth industry offshore, it has a knock-on effect on your society, and this is what we need to see imminently. And even looking at the SIDs, by their very nature, they're extremely susceptible to sea level rise. And that is why I wanted to mention one of our key products, next slide please, Gabby, is the digital terrain model. This is produced by our bathymetry lot, Seabed 2030, and it is a very high resolution data product, and it is the uptake for this data product is extremely high. It has a global coverage, and it is one of these baseline layers that is needed for offshore maritime spatial planning, and for looking at what can be developed offshore and how to manage it. So I would urge you to take a look at this. It can be downloaded in tiles. Next slide, please. Another resource is the work for aquaculture, obviously. bathymetry forms a big part of selecting sites, and then once sites are in place, monitoring changing conditions, and then carrying out environmental impact assessments. So in combination with all of the thematics, it should be a successful sort of application of data to information for the user. Next slide, please. So this is an example of the layers that we have available already through the Human Activities portal for aquaculture. If you go to the next slide, looking at an example of Guadeloupe, in phase 4 of EMODnet, we will be looking towards having a lot more data provision from the Caribbean and for those territories which can provide data so that we can use them to add value to the products that we already have there. Next slide, please. And you can see there is already some information there for Guadeloupe. And any information which is there has metadata associated with it. So there should be full transparency for the user to have that sort of a sense of reassurance in its application. And we're coming to the end. So the last slide, use cases, just I wanted to invite you to take a look at this section on the EMODnet portal. It is essentially where we put together our successful examples of data which has been used and applied in combination with other data. For this example, I've chosen sustainable fisheries for management practices and recovery of fish stocks. There are many different examples there, and we always believe in using these examples to sort of perhaps motivate or inspire other users and show them the way, if you like, as to kind of how they can apply data successfully. So there's obviously a lot more to EMODnet, but for the time involved, I'm going to stop there and I'm open to questions either now or after this session through email. And I really thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Julie, for that very interesting insight. May we remind all the participants that we will be sharing both the recording of this session as well as the presentations by the panelists in the coming days. We shall now pass on to Karen Peterson, who is a senior manager and one of the co-founders of Seacology, an international NGO that has an impressive track record of projects, amongst which some are award-winning. Karen's primary responsibilities at Seacology include managing the Dominican Republic Mangrove Initiative. She previously managed Seacology's largest project ever, the Sri Lanka Mangrove Conservation Project. She also oversees Seacology's projects in Africa. She previously served as Seacology's program manager, overseeing all of Seacology's field representatives and projects throughout the world. Karen, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here today. Seacology is a US-based organization based in California. I live in Colorado, USA. So I'd like to just share with you Seacology's origins and what we do on islands throughout the world, as well as some examples of our projects. So our core focus is islands. It's actually our only focus, and we are focused on protecting their habitats and cultures. Next slide, please. And why islands? Among many reasons, they're the extinction capitals of the world. Since record keeping began, 86% of reptile extinctions and 88% of bird extinctions have taken place on islands. Next slide, please. And tiny little Lord Howe Island in the Tasman Sea has had more bird species and subspecies extinctions than continental Europe, Asia, and Africa combined. Next slide. So we have broad-reaching impact. We have over 360 projects now in 65 countries, and we operate with a small staff of 8 people in the US, but we rely very heavily upon our field representatives. They are on the ground, eyes and ears on islands around the world. Next slide. And a little bit about our origins. Our founder, Dr. Paul Cox, is a world-renowned ethnobotanist, and he was doing research in Samoa, in Faleaupo, Samoa, about 30 years ago as to medicinal uses for plants found in that forest. Next slide. And when he was there researching, there were loggers in the village, and the reason was basically there was no way to hire a teacher or have a proper school unless the village sold off their logging rights. Next slide. So Dr. Cox went back to the States, raised some money, and was able to construct a school and also pay for a teacher to be located in the school. And as a result, the loggers were chased out of the village, literally, by the village chiefs. Next slide. And to this day, this remains a protected forest. There's a rainforest canopy walkway. So this is Seacology's first project, and it's really the model on which all of our projects are based. Next slide. And here's some examples of our projects since then. Our current large countrywide initiative is in the Dominican Republic. And it is a national mangrove awareness campaign to basically make people aware of the uses of mangroves, about how important they are to coastal resilience, how important they are to fisheries, and sort of turn around the bad impression of them as mosquito-infested swamps, which are good places to dump garbage. So we're just trying to really do a broad public awareness campaign involving youth, children, stakeholders of all kinds. Next slide. So the Dominican Republic has lost a good deal of its mangroves, mostly to coastal development, and there's still threats. They are technically on paper protected, but we are trying to help work with local partners on the ground to enforce their protection and also raise awareness about their uses. Next slide. Part of this is launching some mangrove-based alternative income projects. We've done some mangrove ecotourism projects, and also beekeeping currently is taking place in some small communities. Next slide. As well as BioBlitz's awareness raising events. Obviously, a lot of this has not been able to take place in person, but some has. And just again, engaging people with mangroves and the species that live in them. Next slide. We've also launched a sports for mangroves campaign called Play for the Mangroves, where the DR is crazy about sports. So this is providing sports equipment to children and youth in exchange for mangrove activities like cleanups, planting, art projects, etc. Next slide. Okay, and on to Chile, to Aoteni Island. Next slide. This area is incredibly biodiverse, incredible marine biodiversity, and the indigenous communities there wanted to create a large marine protected area, and also stop the production of new salmon farms, which is a very polluting industry here. So waste management, as in so many islands, is a huge problem there. So this project was to provide waste management infrastructure and help this community support this community in the establishment of their marine reserve. Next slide. So this involved getting a compactor, getting baling equipment, and getting it to the island, and creating a small building for it to go in. And a lot of the waste is plastics from the salmon and mussel farms. So that and household waste is being collected, baled, and then sent to be processed on the mainland. Next slide. And that's just the little building that was constructed for the recycling equipment. Next slide. Okay, on to the Sundarbans. This is the world's largest mangrove area, shared by India and Bangladesh. And this was a mangrove protection and replanting project. Next slide. And the community benefit was the purchase of this boat that is being used for environmental education and to take people around to mangroves, educate them about mangroves. This is an area where there's lots of tigers. It's a World Heritage Site. There's no real accurate maps of this area because it's so constantly shifting and changing because of the tides. So it's just a fascinating area. Next slide. So this boat is being used to take people around into the mangrove areas and educate them. Next slide. And there's a group of school kids that went out on the boat. Next slide. In Kenya, a very common community need is water collection. And this is Giriama Island in Kenya. It used to be connected to the mainland by a large area of mangroves, but the mangroves were cut down to create salt ponds, which then degraded the water supply. So we funded a couple of these, 3 or 4 of them, I think, in Africa now. They're basically big cement water catchments. And in return, the community is planting mangroves. Next slide. And rehabilitating some of these salt pond areas and helping to rehabilitate the hydrology of the island itself. Next slide. They've partnered with the Kenyan Forest Service, and there's been really good results with the mangrove replanting. This island is also frequented by 4 different species of sea turtles. Next slide. Okay, on to Madagascar. This is a village that needed a school. I'm going to brush along here a little bit because I think I'm using too much time. This is an area where there's a high population of silky sificas, which are a very, very rare lemur that cannot exist in captivity. This village had a very poor school, and they also didn't have a decent bridge to cross over to the school so that the kids could get to the school. Next slide. So in exchange for an agreement to protect the habitat of the neighboring park where these sificas live, we built this bridge and also a school. Next slide. The bridge washed out a couple years ago, but we paid to have it replaced. Next slide. And in Malaysia, this was a microhydro water system project. Next slide. This is a very lush and diverse rainforest. Next slide. And basically, we provided materials for this water system that uses gravity-fed streams. It has to be a certain angle. This photo is from when the system washed out a couple of years ago, and they had to replace the equipment. It took several tries to get the equipment up to the site, but they got it. Next slide. And that's the powerhouse for the generator. This is a forest protection project. Papua New Guinea, this is a mixed forest and marine protected area. This is a medical clinic that was provided. Next slide. And it took them 8 years, but they got the government to provide a permanent health worker. So that was great news. Next slide. Another very biodiverse area. Next slide. Our Sri Lanka Mangrove Conservation Project was our largest project. It was a 5-year countrywide project. Next slide. And it supported the government of Sri Lanka, not monetarily, but supported the government's decision to protect all of its mangrove forests. Next slide. And our role was to provide microgrants to women in coastal communities in exchange for mangrove protection. We also built a mangrove museum and a community center. Next slide. And several hundred hectares of mangroves were planted as well. Next slide. And our last project is in Wales. This is a seagrass project. Next slide. These are some really important remnants of seagrass in northern Wales that have been damaged by ship anchors. So we provided some mooring buoys as well as replanting of seagrass to help mitigate this problem because seagrass is so incredibly important. Next slide. And there's been very good success with this method of propagating seagrass. So this is going quite well. It's a small area, but it's very important. Next slide. And since monitoring wasn't able to take place in person, they set up these little cameras to monitor the seagrass growth. Next slide. Okay, and just some lessons. You know, a lot of islands have similarities, but they also have a lot of differences, but we have these replicable and scalable solutions that we've tried to implement over the years. And our field representatives are the lifeblood of what we do. We couldn't do what we do without them. There's just no substitute for having people on the ground. Check your assumptions at the door. So whatever you think going into a community, you just have to go in with a very open mind and just be open to whatever you learn. You know, we stayed true to our original mission, but we've also had to adapt to all sorts of things, all sorts of emerging vulnerabilities in islands. So we've tried to innovate as best we can. Our projects are relatively small from a fiscal point of view, but we feel that they really do help protect the biodiversity of islands as well as help the resilience of communities. We like to engage women as much as possible. They tend to really be important to getting things done on islands. And just you need to take time to make sure you understand what the communities are, what capacities they have, what obstacles they may face, and every community is slightly different in that regard. And also decision-making processes vary region by region, so make sure that you take the time to understand what they are and create the time and space to create capacity in communities. So that's the end of my presentation. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Karen, for that very interesting presentation. I loved especially your last slide with all the lessons learned. I think we could all identify to some extent, whoever of us works in islands can really, could really identify with some of those lessons learned. We'll pass on to our next speaker before we will take on some questions. I would like to remind all participants that the Q&A function is open and you may wish to place your questions over there so that we can refer them to our presenters. We shall now pass on to Lucienne Meilak, who is Director for Policy Implementation within the Ministry for Transport, Infrastructure and Capital Projects in the Republic of Malta. And Lucienne has extensive experience in the policy drafting and the management of EU funds, and has been and will be bringing together to the fore and presenting to this webinar a very interesting case study about aquaculture, specifically about the Maltese context on aquaculture. Lucienne, the floor is yours.
Thank you. And good afternoon or good morning. Basically, yes, I'd like to first, explain to you that for Malta, of course, being an island in the middle of the Mediterranean, the blue economy has been very much at the center of our economic growth and well-being. But one has to distinguish between the traditional sectors, such as the marine, the tourism sectors, the fishery sectors, and the more recent ones, like offshore renewable energy, aquaculture, seabed extractive activities, and marine biotechnology. Can we show the slide, Gabriella, please? Yes. So we go on to the next slide. That's what I just said, basically the importance of the blue economy. Basically, Malta is one of the 5 EU states, member states, that has a very high contribution of the blue economy to its economy. In fact, it contributes 4.7% of Malta's GDP and employs around 10,400 persons. while generating 406 million euros in gross value added. Obviously, the sectors changed over time, and the most significant expansion has been recorded, in fact, in Ireland, Portugal, and Malta, with an increase in importance of this blue economy by 50% over the last decade. Malta has also seen an expansion in employment, in employment terms, when in comparison with the 2018 figures, it has grown. The blue economy jobs have grown. The blue jobs have grown by 50% greater than 2009. Basically, the next slide brings us to the subject of today's talk, really, aquaculture and its growth. This is something recent I say because perhaps I'm told. It kicked off in 1988. And basically it is, since Malta has no lakes and no rivers, it is a marine-based aquaculture, which we have, taking the form either of floating cages. It takes the form, in fact, of floating cages, and there are two types. One dealing with captured wild fish, in the case of tuna penning, and referred to as capture-based species, and the other referred to as the farming of closed-cycle species. And here we deal with sea bass and sea bream that are cultured from eggs produced in hatcheries. Aquaculture was introduced about 3 decades ago, following the setting up of the National Aquaculture Centre. The internal market for fish in Malta being a small place, aquaculture cannot just depend on the Maltese market. As a matter of fact, the produce of aquaculture is exported. In the early 90s, commercial fish farms starting producing the European sea bass and also the sea bream. So it evolved with the type of fish that was produced. The NAC, the NAC has developed its own pilot marine hatchery for the production of the sea bream and the sea bass in 1992. The initial target was for an annual production of 400,000 juveniles, and this was achieved in 1994. During the following period, the 1995 to 1998 period, the production increased to 1.5 million as the NAC improved its technology in hatchery. In 2001, the National Aquaculture Centre was in fact renamed the Malta Centre for Fishery Sciences and offered expertise to the regulatory bodies and technical support to the local industry. So here we have this partnership between the governmental, as it were, the scientific and the industry. Today, the centre focuses mainly on aquaculture research and is known as the Malta Aquaculture Research Centre, MAR for short. In fact, MAR is the only research facility in Malta for hatching marine species. The industry has 4 tuna ranches that produce over 80% of Malta's aquaculture production, 2 capture-based aquaculture, and 2 closed-cycle species farms that produce the sea bream and the sea bass. The tuna farms operate from the south and north aquaculture zones, whereas the closed-cycle species farms operate closer to the shore at Mistra Bay, which is in the north on the map, as you can see. So in the north at Mistra Bay, St. Paul's Bay, Meilak on the north coast, and off La Lagine on the southern coast and southern end of the Maltese Islands. The tuna farms are offshore, approximately 6 kilometers off the coast towards the southeast side of the main island, in approximately a sea depth of 90 meters. The bulk of penned tuna production is exported to Japan as a frozen product, primarily for the use in the sushi and the sashimi trade. Next slide. There you can see basically the performance of the sector, of this now important sector over the years. Fish farming has definitely had a positive effect on the employment of unskilled and skilled labor. It does definitely earn the country hard-earned currency from exports, and there is a high local value added, resulting from a net cash inflow. It is estimated, in fact, that the industry has up to 1,185 full-time equivalent direct and indirect jobs, with a gross value added of 70 million to the Maltese economy. According to our National Statistics Office, in 2017, the industry produced a total of 15,721 tons of fish, with a total value of 180 million euros. Basically, here the dependence is on tuna, with the total sales, while the total output of aquaculture industry amounted to 239.2 million, an increase of 18.9% over 2017. In volume terms, the total sales of fish amounted to 19,291 tons, an increase of 22.7% over the preceding year. As you can see from the presentation, there was a dip in 2019, and this was mainly due to a very bad storm that damaged the installations, the fish installations, since the installations are out at sea. And also it coincided as well with a decrease in the Commission's approved capacity. There were also some periods of uncertainty as the department had some changes in leadership in this time as well. So it's a combination of factors really. The performance of the sector, the next slide. In our next slide, we can see that the annual census conducted among all the enterprises operating in the local aquaculture and tuna farming industry indicates that during 2019, the combined output generated by this activity fell. This fall, which I just explained, due to three factors. Similarly, the intermediate consumption of the industry, which comprises the main operating expenses incurred by the operators, fell by 46 million euro. That amounted to about 20% over that registered in the previous year. In terms of volume, the total sales of farmed fish, all right, fell by 5,000 tons, or 28% when compared to the preceding year. And this was mainly due to a decline in farmed tuna volume sales of 5,356 tons. So in terms of value, the total sales of farmed fish decreased by 80.8 million euros. So anyway, there was a bit of a dip there. So the sector is rather sensitive to certain things. The next slide, the importance of research and the development in aquaculture cannot be underestimated. So we had the national body, as I said, is the Malta Aquaculture Research Centre, MAR. The main emphasis for research and development has been the development of alternative species. There has been a dependence on tuna, and therefore we try to make the sector diversify to other species. The key areas for research and the development focus on the needs of the industry. So there's this partnership between the scientists and the industry. That is the development of closed cycle systems for species with a high economic return, such as bluefin tuna, the amberjack, red scorpion fish, red porgy mullet, etc. Other species that are of interest include the common cuttlefish, the grey mullet, and species that can be used as live feed. Research is ongoing for fish husbandry techniques and other areas that may need to be investigated. Next slide, please. So here you can see the offal of bluefin tuna, and we can give some examples of the impact that this industry has on other important sectors. We have, in fact, a Italo-Maltese inter-regional project which concerns the application of biotechnology for human health and blue growth, which was started in 2017 and which will come to an end in November of this year. The project revolves around the concept of treating fish waste, the offal and bones, as a resource which can be used to produce commercially viable products. This is achieved by two separate operations: the extraction of the protein collagen from the fish waste, and it can be used for pharmaceutical, nutritional, or cosmetic industries. Fish waste is converted also. Another option is that fish waste can be converted into fish meal, which can be used as animal feed. Both fish meal and collagen production would have a positive socio-economic and environmental impact. Another project is the Prima Project concerning the self-sufficient integrated multi-trophic aquaponics systems for improving food production, sustainability, and brackish water. It's important here to underline this important link of research in making this a sustainable and in contributing to the sustainability of our economy, of the sector itself, and its byproducts, in fact, going into good use rather than creating waste. There's more research which I can go through. The next slide, please. And here we're talking about the culturing of an isopod with the intentions of exploring the possibility of using it as live feed or fish meal to farmed fish, as I explained earlier. And another study exploring the use of otoliths and eye lenses for stable isotype life history analysis of Atlantic bluefin tuna. The study intends to apply stable isotype analysis to 2 incrementally grown tissues in commercially important pelagic fishes. Results from the study will provide estimates of field metabolic rates to understand individual and population level responses of bluefin tuna and swordfish to environmental changes. So here we are going to contribute to the life of these 2 types of fish in their habitat. The study is being undertaken in collaboration with the University of Southampton. Next slide, please. There are other projects being done by the Aquaculture Research and the Development, but I can't go into all this detail because I think I might be running out of time. The Centre also follows projects in the area of conservation. Presently, the Aquaculture Centre contributes to the Killifish Conservation Project, which is run in collaboration with the Nature Trust Malta. So here we have a partnership even with the NGOs, the environmental NGOs. The aim of the project is to conserve Malta's national fish, okay, which you can see on the top of the picture, which is listed in the IUCN list of threatened species. Now, all of this, of course, is only possible if it has only been possible through the institutional and regulatory framework that has been instrumental in finding the right balance of aquaculture and the rest of the economy, the rest of the blue economy, and the rest of our competing uses for the coast. The Department of Fisheries and Aquaculture within the Ministry for Agriculture, Fisheries, Food and Animal Rights regulates and administers the aquaculture industry. So this is important to know that it is the same ministry that is also responsible for fisheries that aquaculture is part of. Aquaculture Directorate, however, within the ministry oversees the research and development as well as the regulatory arm of aquaculture within the Department of Fisheries and Aquaculture. The next slide, please. Of course, the Aquaculture Directorate also has an educational role where there are local and foreign students that carry out the studies and research projects, all right? And in fact, at this point in time, since the Commission has adopted the new strategic guidelines in 2021, the European Maritime Fisheries and Aquaculture Fund that is now running 2021 to 2027 will continue to make available funding for EU aquaculture. Malta, of course, is supportive of the Commission's new strategic guidelines, and since these have a strong positive impact on both the aquaculture industry and on the preservation and the natural marine environment. This is especially important in our case in Malta because we have scarce natural resources and the impact of great pressure on the local environment by demands from competing industries and high population density makes it all the more of a challenge. That's the slide I need. Yes, thank you, Gabriella. Aquaculture, the strategy, 2014-2025. I think you are a slide away. There we are. Perfect. So we are here steering the growth now towards sustainable growth. And we're going to do this through improved regulation, to improved operations, more importantly, improved environmental monitoring and enhanced innovation. And the Directorate is responsible for the strategy, which will give us a holistic vision for the aquaculture sector in Malta, and be in line also with the European Union strategic guidelines for sustainable development of the EU aquaculture. Aquaculture, so we can say, has presented challenges. All right, it has presented challenges in the past. In fact, we can say 30 years ago, we started from nothing. There was no such thing as aquaculture in Malta. When I was a little girl in this country, you ate what the fishermen caught. Today, you can go at any time of the year, and customers, people living in Malta, can buy the fish from these farms. So it has also relieved the pressures from the natural, the natural habitat of fish. We're giving our fish stocks time to regenerate, and while we also sustain a higher population with higher demands, such as that of the tourist industry, the restaurant industry, etc. There's a major conflict, of course. There has always been a major conflict, because aquaculture doesn't happen just by chance, doesn't always have no impact on the environment. So this has to be regulated in a certain way and monitored. So these are the challenges. And improving this regulation, through streamlining of the regulatory environment under one directorate with a clear policy on the location of these sites, minimal conflict with other users, and standard conditions for all operators, has been instrumental and will continue to be a very valid contribution to the continued success and sustainability of aquaculture. Improved operation in a way that we can create efficient, productive farms operating according to the principles of best management practice, complying with the operating permits, causing no nuisance to other coastal users, and with a positive public image, which is important. Improved environment monitoring is essential to create a system that recognizes the link between the biomass and impacts, specifies limits to what constitutes adverse impact, right, over what area such impacts are acceptable, and others that are proportionate, practical, and cost-effective. Obviously, this is an area that is innovating and regenerating itself all along. So we have to create better facilities, funding and human resources to allow high quality applied research for the benefit of all industry operators. So these are basically the 4 key objectives that are being dealt with at the moment. So the vision for the next years. Well, the vision for the next years would be that Malta is implementing a multi-annual national plan for the development of sustainable aquaculture, a strategic plan that takes into account the new European guidelines for sustainable aquaculture, which are in line with the European Green Deal, many other initiatives of the EU, like the Farm to Fork strategy and the biodiversity strategy, to ensure economic growth in the sector while protecting the environment. For the past 26 years, aquaculture has constituted an important sector for the local marine industry, but the need to expand the sector further is much felt. In light of this, Malta conforms to the same vision of upgrading and expanding the industry, with the aim of creating jobs and opportunities that are green and sustainable, and the market climate that is viable and attractive for SMEs as well as for budding startups. The tools needed to attain this vision lie within the research and development community, with the potential to collaborate and embark on research projects with national and regional entities, stakeholders, organizations, businesses, etc., in order to ensure that Malta is well equipped to facilitate the research and development and innovation needed to take on the upcoming strategy and action plan. The government will be setting up a new aquaculture research center and aquaculture analytical testing facilities. At the moment, this is all I have to say. It's a pleasure having had this opportunity to go through and outline this sector that has become such an important mainstay of our economy and our blue economy especially. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucienne, for that very detailed presentation. We will now, as we are running a bit behind schedule, what we'll do is we'll take on some of the other presentations and we'll leave all the questions we've been getting till the very end of after all the presentations have been made. So we will now, without further ado, we'll pass on to His Excellency Ronald Jumo, who is a former cabinet minister and a former ambassador at large for climate change, sustainability, island issues, and the ocean. He has also served as Seychelles' permanent representative to the UN. He has also worked on the Global Island Partnership, GLISPA, and also served as its board chair. He has also headed Seychelles delegations to the UN climate change conferences between 2007 and 2020. And he is currently the chair of the Executive Council of SIDS DOC, the SIDS Global Sustainable Energy and Climate Resilience Organization. Excellency, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Gabriella. I'm going to change tack and take you on a voyage with Seychelles. I'm really going after partnerships here, of how big partnerships can generate smaller partnerships all over the country, and so the benefit of partnerships. As you may know, Seychelles is a highly developed SIDS, island developing state, and because of that, we don't have access to concessional funding, to grants, and we are highly indebted. We went into an IMF program in 2008 following the global financial and economic crisis. We had brought our debt down from about 160% of GDP down to 58% of GDP last year, headed to 50%. COVID hits, tourism collapses, and we're back at 100% of GDP. So where are we going to get funding? And this is where we felt that since all the traditional sources of funding, which were bilateral, government donors, multilateral, intergovernmental, which had brought us this far, were not really meeting the needs of meeting the 2030 agenda and the Paris Agreement, we decided to go into partnerships in keeping with the theme of the 2014 SIDS conference in Samoa, which was the sustainable development of SIDS through genuine and durable partnerships. So in Paris, COP21, Seychelles officially launched the world's first debt swap for the oceans. That was debt swap with the Paris Club in partnership with the Nature Conservancy, TNC, of the USA. One of the things that happened because of that debt swap is we set up SECAT, which is the Seychelles Conservation and Climate Adaptation Trust, which manages the proceeds of this $22 million debt swap. And what the trust has done, one of the targets was to provide to the Seychelles people, and that includes any individual, including groups, community groups, women's associations, youth groups, up to $750,000 per year in grants. That is not a lot of money in the bigger scheme of things, but for a population of 98,000 people, $750,000 a year in grants is a lot of money. Now, I'm pleased to say that 55% of the grants have gone to projects led by women. And what has happened as we've given the grants, they cover everything from sustainable fisheries, development of blue economy entrepreneurship, ocean climate action, ocean sustainability, conservation. And because of the debt swap, we protected 30% of our EEZ. Now, Seychelles ocean space is 3,000 times bigger than our islands. We protected 30% of our ocean, which is the size of Germany. Half of that, 15% of our ocean, is fully protected. That's the size almost of Great Britain. So that provides a huge fertile area to develop partnerships. Now, one of the grants, for example, I said 55% were taken by women. What has happened is that through these grants, the Seychelles have reached out to partners abroad and brought in additional funding. And one particular story I'd like to talk about is one of our women scientists wanted to do research on sooty tern. Now, Seychelles is very famous for its seabird colonies. In fact, some of our islands are called citadels, seabird citadels or capitals of the Indian Ocean. And she wanted to check sooty terns. They come to Seychelles in their millions every year at a certain season, and they lay eggs, and then they leave, and they disappear. And she wanted to follow the sooty terns, the parents, the chicks, to find out what happens. So she put tags, satellite tags, on these sooty terns. And she was on the international social media talking to other scientists abroad. A scientist at the Max Planck Institute of Vulnerable Behavior in Germany, who had put satellite tags on sooty terns in Polynesia, learned of her project. So he contacted her in the middle of this COVID and offered her 300 satellite tags, which were more expensive and not only more sophisticated than the ones she was using, but these satellite tags are tracked by the Icarus mode of the International Space Station. She had never thought this would happen. And in the middle of COVID, as soon as Seychelles opened its borders and allowed people in, as we tried to reestablish tourism and allowed people coming in, this scientist and a colleague flew to Seychelles with those 300 tags and began helping her tag the sooty terns. So now, from a small project of putting tags to find out where do the sooty terns go, where do the chicks go, do they go with the parents, etc., she's suddenly in a partnership with the Max Planck Institute in Germany and using the International Space Station. And this shows you that when you go into the partnership and you choose the right partners, you never know where you're going to end up. Now, I'm talking about tagging sooty terns. This is not just conservation about birds. The sooty terns forage out at sea, meaning sooty terns go out and find bait. The same fish that sooty terns go after, hunt, are also chased by fish like tuna. Now, we all know that in international tuna fishing, that one of the biggest, most controversial issues are fish aggregating devices that use satellite tracking. But the fish aggregating devices don't follow fish. Birds do. Follow the birds, you'll find the fish. And what is happening with the fish is because of climate change, warming seas, the fish, especially migratory fish, are changing their patterns. And this can result in affecting the nesting of birds, because if the fish move to other parts of the Indian Ocean, the birds will follow, because that's their food. Now, the island where she's tracking the birds is a privately owned island with a hotel resort. And that hotel resort is supporting this partnership because its biggest attraction, in Seychelles we're famous for our beaches, etc. Its biggest attraction is that every time, at a certain time of year, every year, millions of sooty terns and other seabirds come to nest on the island. So if it loses the seabirds, its main attraction will be lost. At the same time, local fishermen who are not part of this project are following the project. They're following the birds. And they have an interest to find out what is happening, not to the birds, but to the fish. And the bait, both the bait and the fish that hunt these bait, which are tuna. So what you're having, without intending it, is a partnership that spreads across the whole economy, our blue economy. And we've seen that time and again, that a partnership that the government did with the Nature Conservancy for debt relief, mainly debt relief and conservation of 30% of our ocean, is now generating these other partnerships. Another thing that partnership did is that generated in us, in our thinking in Seychelles, that people suddenly started thinking bigger. We stopped thinking like a small island state and started thinking like a big ocean state, like a boss. It changed the way we approach things. We didn't think outside the box. One of our presidents said, why should there be a box? Because as soon as you think about the box, you're limiting your thinking to the box. So that's all. Then other people started thinking, and the government got together with the World Bank and the Global Environment Facility and launched the world's first blue bonds, first sovereign blue bonds. And that's for sustainable fishing, to transition the domestic and artisanal fishery to more sustainable practices. And what that blue bond does, it offers to the fishing industry cheaper loans than commercial banks for fisheries projects on condition they adopt sustainable practices. So that's two huge innovative initiatives that came out of Seychelles. Now, this thinking has filtered down. And last week I was talking to Gabriella and Patrick about these. And Gabriella and Patrick, I'm pleased to say we have a new initiative that just came out this week. And it has nothing to do with the government. One of our NGOs, I also put his thinking cap on and saying, how can I find partners? Now, it runs an island that is a nature reserve. What many people don't know is that in island countries where tourism is the main driver of the economy, it is tourism that pays for the running of protected areas because you charge tourists to visit. So when the tourism collapses, people don't come to visit, they can't charge the tourists, and you charge the tourists for an exchange. Seychelles, if you're Seychelles, you visit these areas, you're not charged, it's free. So they put their thinking cap on and said, what are we going to do? They announced this week, it's called Nature Seychelles. Nature Seychelles partnered with IUCN, the International Union for Conservation of Nature, and Porini Foundation to launch the world's first digital species. What it is doing, one of the rarest birds in the world called the magpie robin in Seychelles, there are only about 400 in the entire country. Cousin Island, where this is taking place, has 59 of those birds. It is selling those birds digitally through non-fungible tokens, one of the newest things on the market. And you buy this bird, and since the birds are ringed, you have an individual bird that you can track. If it lays eggs, it's going to have kids, etc., etc. You can track it. It is yours. So we've gone from a debt swap into the bond market, and the bond market, as I said, was the government, the Global Environment Facility, and the World Bank. And the bonds were bought by 3 purchases in the US. And when I looked at one of the buyers of the Seychelles Blue Bond, it owns a retirement fund for head teachers in the US. I mean, head teachers in the US funding sustainable artisanal fishing in an island in the middle of the Indian Ocean. And now this Nature Seychelles, which is an NGO, the government was not even involved, broke out on its own, breaks into the NFT market. And if it works, tomorrow, larger countries, larger parks can use the same thing to raise funding to protect elephants or rhinos or whatever it is you have in your country. Because when you buy an NFT, what you buy is unique. It's yours, but only digitally. And you can follow it digitally. And this is what partnerships has happened. It's made our people dare to think, dare to reach out. And one of the benefits, one of the co-benefits of all this is that once the word gets out that you are adventurous, you are ready to do this sort of thing, you're ready to partner with the most unimaginable partners that you would think of, they come looking for you. And there's a word out there. If you have a new idea in the word in conservation, ocean sustainability, ocean productivity, if you have something new that sounds a bit crazy, take it to the Seychelles. They're probably crazy enough to listen to you. So it begets, people say, we want to be part of this. They want to get on board. So what we did is, instead of thinking of a small country, 115 islands totaling 455 square kilometers, 98,000 people, we thought as a big ocean state of 1.34 million square kilometers, and we are leveraging the ocean. And our next objective is when we go to COP26, we will announce that our blue carbon assets, mainly mangroves and seagrass beds, we have committed to protect 50% of our seagrass beds and mangroves by 2030, 100% by 2050. They will form part of our nationally determined contribution, and all this, and that itself is a new partnership with Pew Trust, Oxford University, Seychelles University, SECAT, individual scientists all coming together as a partnership to take us to COP26. That's what we found now, is once you're brave enough, and this is islanders are voyages, once you're brave enough to sail beyond the horizon, you'll be surprised by what you find there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Excellency. That is extremely inspiring, and I really like the way you ended it, and the shift that the Seychelles did from thinking in terms of limitations of SIDS of being 98,000 and turning it around into, being more solution oriented and thinking in large ocean states, which in fact most SIDS are. Without further ado, I'm sure we'll have plenty of questions coming in about that example as well. And without further ado, we'll pass on to our last presenter. Riyad Medeb is a seasoned economist and international development professional with extensive experience both within SIDS, but also from within the UN agencies. He is representing the UNDP, the United Nations Development Programme, as Senior Principal Advisor for SIDS, and has been recently appointed as Director of the UNDP Global Center on Technology, Innovation and Sustainable Development. Congratulations, Riyad. Riyad, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Gabriella. Thank you for inviting UNDP, for sharing its experience on our UNDP SIDS offer, and mostly on the focus on blue economy. Before starting the presentation, I would like to share with you a short video explaining what we are doing currently in UNDP on blue economy, not alone, but as Ambassador Jumo explained, in partnership with AOSIS, the Alliance of Small Island States, but also different colleagues who are here, like UNDESA, OHLLS, UNEP, FAO, and ARENA, for examples. Gabriella, can we put the video, please? Thank you very much, Gabriella. I will have some slides. So the main, as you've seen in the video.
Welcome, everybody. Let me start this. Welcome to the Financing COVID-19 Recovery for a Green, Purple, and Digital Transition that leaves no.
There was a technical problem.
There is a technical problem. Just a second, Riyad. I do apologize. Too many windows.
Yes. In the meantime, I start explaining. I've just seen in the video the main definition for blue economy for UNDP is, of course, as was said before, is the sustainable use of the resources of the ocean, but is also preservation and restoration. And the approach of UNDP on the small island state on the blue economy is embedded in slide number 2. If we can be on full screen, please, is embedded with 3 pillars. 3 pillars in order to be able to have a transformative development in small island developing states, and also respond to the objective of the priority of the Samoa pathway, the sustainable development goals, but also to accelerate the green recovery post-COVID-19 and transformative development. The 3 pillars are linked to each other. We cannot approach the blue economy in the small island developing state in isolation, but it is linked to the climate action, and it is linked to what Ambassador Jumo said before, the digital transformation. So it is currently, that's what UNDP is currently doing in its offer for the small island developing states. The current portfolio for the small island developing state for UNDP, as we are present in 50 SIDS, is around $1.5 billion. I don't know, I don't see the slides, Gabriella. It's around $1.5 billion. And thank you very much. And the current portfolio on the blue economy is $210 million in the SIDS. And it is focusing mostly in terms of response to sustainable use of the resources, for example, on the sustainable use of the fishery, where we support, thank you, where we support in the Pacific, for example, tuna fishery, where 4 major tuna stock were classified as biologically healthy. Employment in fishery increased by 4,800 between 2015 and 2019. Revenue from fishing license fees increased by 20%. And finally, shark bycatch in the Pacific FAA members decreased by 40%. This is exactly kind of examples that we are doing in partnership with the actors. In the level of marine conservation, which is part of the sustainable use of the resources, I just give one of the examples where in Mauritius, UNDP is supporting the protection of coastal and marine ecosystem through a network of interlinked voluntary conservation area co-managed by the community. This is what Ambassador Jumo said before. It didn't come from the government. Came from the community. They create their own area. They manage their own area by themselves. And this is something, real examples of partnership that we can have with the civil society. Finally, one of the elements, as you've seen, of the SIDS offer, raising of a SIDS on the blue economy, is to try to support government to develop their blue economy strategies and blue economies policy. We have developed the regulatory and institutional framework for each country. And for the moment, as an example, we have done a blue economy scoping and assessment in Barbados, the British Virgin Islands, Dominica, and Montserrat that identify and establish new emerging blue economy sectors for those countries. Another example is also the blue economy strategy, which is under preparation in Guinea-Bissau. And finally, blue economy financing roadmap under preparation in Timor-Leste. Next slide, please. What kind of innovation approach we can have? So UNDP has created and established a network of accelerator lab, 10 accelerator lab in small island developing state. One of them, which is the one in Barbados, is focusing mainly on blue economy. And good examples of results, which is the initiative on bioplastic production utilizing seaweed. The second is on coral reef mapping using underwater drone production, underwater drone. The third is production of biomethane from fish waste and other organic waste. And finally, a traceable fishery tuna brand using blockchain technology, where we have, which, as you see, the link to the digital part of the work. The small grant program, which is a partnership between UNDP and the GEF. So between 2020 to 2024, the small grant program is dedicating $3 million for blue economy innovation in Barbados, in Cape Verde, Cuba, Dominican Republic, Guinea-Bissau, with focus areas on fishery, ecotourism from the blue economy, climate resilience, and aquaculture. Finally, one of a very interesting initiative is the Ocean Innovation Challenge, where the first call, which is funded through in partnership with Sweden, we got more than 600 proposals, and we shortlisted 9, and from the 9, 1/3 are from the small island developing states. Comoros has an innovative financial mechanism for plastic waste recovery, reuse, and recycling. Cabo Verde on digital technology to optimize wastewater treatment. Maldives on extended producer responsibility framework to close the loop on plastic waste. We just launched the second innovation challenge, and with this time in partnership with Norway and Sweden. Next slide, please. COVID-19, as we said from the beginning, impacted heavily the small island developing state. And as the High Representative Rattray highlighted, as he mentioned, highlighted the vulnerability of small island developing state. Triple impact, public health impact, economic impact, exacerbation of SIDS vulnerability. For most of the SIDS, tourism and fishery are the most important economic sector. So in tourism in 2020, global tourism international arrival dropped by 74%. The collapse in international tourism could cause a loss of around 4 trillion of the global GDP for 2020 and 2021. Fishing, coastal community experienced reduced income, increased unemployment, and decreased supply of protein. Disruption to fishery monitoring, control of surveillance have led to more illegal, unregulated, and reported fishing. But we have some positive notes. Does not mean that we will remain here. In the small island developing state, we are moving forward. Next slide, please. And that is a good example where we try to be innovative for having a green recovery, and through this new partnership for financing the blue economy, the Global Fund for Coral Reef, in partnership with the Prince Albert II of the Monaco Foundation and Paul Allen Family Foundation, in close cooperation with UNCDF, UN Environment Program, the MPTF, and of course in a financial institution, BNP Paribas, a 500 million blended finance vehicle that leveraged grant to unlock private sector investment in blue economy, incubate in an investable project, scale up coral reef conservation. And in the newly endorsed 10 years investment plan by the Global Fund for Coral Reef, 9 small island developing states are considered as priorities ecosystem. Next slide, please. And as an example, in Fiji, the GFCR funded Investing in Coral Reef and Blue Economy project is being implemented by UNDP, UNCDF, UNEP, and the Ministry of Economy, NGOs and private sector partners, all together in supporting the initiative. And it will provide catalytic investment to unlock private and public investment capital for initiatives that have a positive impact on Fijian coral reef and the community to rely on them. In the short term, the project is expected to support the recovery and sustain to the income of food security more than 6,000 fishers household. And this is also with the support of the joint SDG fund. Thank you. This is what I wanted to share with all of you. The success of the SIDS offer, the UNDP SIDS offer raising up for SIDS, is feasible only in one condition, is what Ambassador Jumo said, is strengthening the partnership with the UN agencies, partnership with a certain numbers of countries, partnership with government, but partnership with civil society and private sector. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Riyad, for that once again very interesting presentation and overview, I would say, which spans across the very varied work that is being undertaken by UNDP in many countries and in many regions. We have so we'll kick off the presentation. So the questions. So I'll ask all presenters to kindly switch on their cameras. We have the first question, and I'd like to put this to all of the presenters. So it's clear that SIDS often require assistance for various reasons to develop their educational and training sectors, to fill the gaps which exist in their technical capacity for marine research, for planning, for decision making, which are obviously necessary if they are to exploit the opportunities presented by the blue economy. In what way, and this question is open to all the presenters, in what way can SIDS be assisted from your experience, perhaps by your organizations directly, or from your experience in working in partnerships within governments? Whoever wants to take the floor. Perhaps Julie?
Yes, of course. Can you hear me? Well, actually, speaking on behalf of EMODnet, primarily EMODnet's remit is to be a data and data product and web services platform. So its remit does not extend to management measures, etc. But I think this is something that needs to be viewed from our perspective as a resource, a readily available resource, which can best inform measures, obviously, which can best inform policy and then how things need to be done in any individual area. So I have to make that clear. Although there are partnerships and although we do listen to our users in terms of which products are needed by them, both at the European level and also with the regional sea conventions, we look to see what is needed in terms of assessment and monitoring, and then each thematic lot actually takes it upon themselves to make the product which can best serve the purpose which is needed in any particular area. So I don't know if I've answered your question, Gabriella.
Yes, absolutely. Perhaps I'd like to also ask both Ambassador Jumo and Riyad and Karen to perhaps chip in on this as well, because I think all your organizations or all your experiences have had direct experience of this. Perhaps Ambassador Jumo?
One of the things we did when we were planning our blue economy strategy and roadmap is that people from the highest levels of government, principal secretaries who are second under the ministers, who are responsible for putting the government's thoughts on blue economy together, met with the youth groups and asked them, where do you see yourself in this? This is what we're trying to do. This is where we're heading. It's a new way we're looking at the ocean from the way in the past. And the reason we met with the youth groups was because they were trying to encourage more youth to do further studies in these areas of the ocean. All these areas are coming up. And so they asked the youth themselves, do you see yourself in this? Secondly, if you're interested in being part of this, either being employed by government, setting up a business private sector where you can get the grants and the blue loans, or as civil society, NGOs, what assistance do you think you're going to need? What training do you think you're going to need? Another thing we've done in the partnerships is we partnered not just with financial organizations, not just with UN organizations, we partnered with academia. For example, including low carbon in our NDC to COP26, we partnered with Oxford University, which is helping us. Oxford University, also a partner in the same partnership, is the Seychelles University, which is one of the smallest universities, youngest universities in the world. Here you have Oxford University partnering with. So instead of having a formal government Ministry of Education reaches out through a partnership, a project, the two came up alongside each other. And in one of the research projects funded by SECAT, it took, there were 5 young Seychelles researchers who went along with them. And as a result of their participation in that, they went diving with the Necton mission, which is linked to Oxford University. Oxford University offered one of the young women researchers 1 year's internship in Oxford University itself to follow up her research. And the trust fund for the debt swap paid for her to go. So we're finding outside of traditional ways of doing things, signing agreements between ministries of education, is to see where these partnerships, things that are practical on the ground. She didn't go for a degree. She already had a degree. She went for further training in a specific area that she could use on the ground. So it's once again, finding new ways of doing old things, because we're going into a new world with the 2030 agenda. So it was making sure right from the beginning that young people are involved right from the planning stages, so that you know what they need and where you're going to try and find the assistance they need. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Karen, from your experience, what do you think?
Well, to kind of tag on to what His Excellency was saying, one thing we've been doing is engaging with stakeholders that some people find unexpected, but especially in the Dominican Republic, in our new initiative there, engaging with the fishing communities and listening to them about what they're facing in terms of the overfishing issues and impediments to sustainable livelihoods. So we're working with fishing co-ops to look at alternatives. I mentioned beekeeping. That's one we're doing in the north of Dominican Republic. And also just engaging with the youth, but engaging also with entire families. So it's not just the fishermen, it's also the women in the community, it's also the children, it's getting the entire family unit engaged in this conversation around conservation and what it means to their community to have a healthy, intact ecosystem, and how we can help facilitate with them achieving what they see for their communities.
Thank you, Karen. So I can deduct that from what Ambassador told us, what you, Karen, told us. There's an element also of engagement on the ground, really, and engaging the youth. So, translating what is ocean, what tends to be very, very linked to biology and all of that, and bringing it to, to really digestible subjects which really affect the well-being of everyone. And I find that extremely interesting. Riyadh, would you like to add anything to that, perhaps?
Yes, I fully agree with my predecessor. We are also engaging with the civil society, the private sector, but the new initiative that we will be launching by September, we are the final phase, is we prepare the dashboard of indicators, and with a very precise GIS instrument for policymakers, for academia in the small island developing state to be able to develop their own policy, their own strategy, and finding all the instruments. And then one element where we go much further than what we can usually find is a part on machine learning using the GIS information on blue economy and how each state can take advantage of its own EEZ, knowing that the small island developing states own 19.1% of all the EEZ of the world. So how it's going to be used in order to have a transformative development, but to be used to be an accelerator for the development of the SIDS linked to the climate action and link to digital transformation. And that you need to have access to concessional financing. And that's what we are trying to do currently with this new initiative on dashboard of indicators.
Perfect. And that links up, also brings us, closes the loop to also what Julie was talking about making what instruments are readily available for SIDS and exploiting them to transform their development. So that is fantastic. Very good. We'll pass on to the next question. So we have also a question which on our Q&A, and the question is for Julie. How does one progress from data services EMODnet? How does one progress from data services? EMODnet provides to practical, actionable knowledge and management information, such as metrics for monitoring mangrove ecosystem health and conservation. Do you have examples of this for the Caribbean, where I am conducting a climate change adaptation project? Do you provide these services, or which partners can you recommend in this area?
Thank you again for the question. It's a very interesting one. I had been drafting the answer in the box, but I would like to invite you to check the physics portal and the chemistry portal that we have. There are various spatial and temporal scales to the parameters, which are all kept there on a map viewer, on a GIS map viewer. And we do have several use cases for coastal zone management. They may not be mangrove areas, but it can give you some insight into what is being done in terms of managing areas in the coastal area, according to the ecosystems approach. Then in terms of guidance, I would direct you to actually the coordinator of the physics and chemistry portal, as well as the biology portal for mangroves. And in a bid to collate an inventory of information that you need. Oftentimes, the EMODnet is a very good starting point to know exactly what is available for your region. As I said, we are compiled of a vast number of organizations now, with each organization with its own network. So it is a very good starting point to do that exercise and to see what we have through EMODnet for you. I would envisage that this will expand, as I mentioned through my presentation. We have a phase 4 in EMODnet, which will include the Caribbean territories, and for which data is held by European entities. So I can only see this improving, but you can follow up by email, and we can investigate it further for you. I hope this answers your question.
I believe it does. Thank you, Julie. Karen, once this question was about mangroves, maybe, and given your experience in DR, even with the projects about mangroves, perhaps are there any tips that you can pass on from your experience as well?
Well, this is such a new project for us in the DR, but we are trying to actually currently find someone to help us with some of the indicators for this. In Sri Lanka, it was, we had a really good stroke of luck in that Sri Lanka was named the head of the Commonwealth of Nations Mangrove Ecosystem and Livelihood Group. So as a result, the government really stepped up their mapping and monitoring of mangroves. Had that not happened, it would have been a very burdensome task for us as a small organization and our small partner organization there. But we're also sort of hoping that the same thing happens in the DR, where the Ministry of the Environment will help step up and provide some better baselines and monitoring going forward.
Thank you, Karen, for that. Lucienne, we have a question. The development of new emerging sectors such as aquaculture have in some instances been successful in matching the contribution of the economy to the more traditional sectors of marine-based economies. What partnerships can be forged to further enhance this contribution or to set up such sectors, perhaps where they don't exist, as was the case in Malta?
I wasn't around when it was set off, 30 years ago. I wasn't involved in this area. I do have persons here who are participating who might know something about this, but I definitely think that getting, the technical experience of someone else, sharing the experience of somebody else, and then applying it to the place where it's going to be rolled out is an important start. And I believe that in Malta, it seems to have been the research arm that started off first to find out what's good and what's applicable and what isn't. And I remember that at the time, I do know this, that there was an involvement of youth. It was like, targeting to send you there, to specialize, to come back, and then give to this area. So obviously there's technical expertise, there's capacity building, there's a regulatory framework, all very relevant. And then of course, not to let things go out of hand, you need to have the implementation and monitoring arm to ensure that the rules are abided by and that the negative effects are not outstripping the positives, and that they are controlled. Because obviously with blue growth, as we very well know, if one sector grows out of hand or uncontrolled, it may easily have an adverse effect on another sector within blue growth or within other areas. So obviously, yes, in an area like ours, when I gave my presentation, the map was very evident. There are very few places where you can have aquaculture in Malta, not a place with lakes, etc. It has to be offshore. And offshore on that part, those parts which I showed, there are competing needs like shipping, like beaches, sandy beaches. There's competing needs. Not to mention as well that we are highly dependent on our seawater for our drinking water. So all these very important, effects. One can affect the other. So getting it right can be, very, very important. For us, it's drinking water, for instance, it's essential. But obviously, definitely the recipe, I think, is exchange in knowledge. These kind of webinars can go a long way. Another conferences and exchanges. I think that this exchange, like the ambassador said earlier, as well with young people being exposed to possibilities, to see whether the youth is interested. Because if youth is not interested, it's going nowhere.
So education and training, clearly.
Education and training, but also, at the beginning, perhaps the research has to be done, the thinking has to be done. What, in an island like ours, you can't get it wrong, because if you get it wrong, you might just ruin the food chain around and etc. and have horrible disastrous effects. So that kind of thing, I think you cannot get it wrong.
As they say in small islands, if you fail, you do fail quite spectacularly, but you can also learn. There's also room for a lot of growth and learning over there. We do have two questions, which I'd like to, if we manage, we'll try to fit them in before passing on to the concluding remarks. So one of them is about the role of the private sector. So perhaps on this, the ambassador, Riyad, possibly Karen as well, might have some comments. How can state institutions and mechanisms contribute to encouraging private industry to provide financial resources and technical support to further develop blue economies, so within SIDS? Ambassador.
Okay, earlier on I was talking about how the trust fund we set up out of the debt swap is generating new partnerships. One of the things that it allows, and this is because people are cautious, we're talking about aquaculture, listen very carefully, private sector are very cautious about going into new areas where there's no expertise or little expertise. The system we set up of blue, we call it the blue financing model that we've set up. The blue financing is the grants and the loans under the blue bonds. It allows someone to take a grant to explore the feasibility of a potential business, entrepreneurship. If they find out through the grant that there's a possibility of turning this into a business, they then take the findings to the Development Bank of Seychelles that manages the blue loans. So from the blue grants, you go to the blue loans. So the feasibility stage, exploring the possibilities, finding where's the market, is not at the expense of that private investor because it's a grant. And they're allowing the grant for a private investor to make business because they are pioneering new areas. Other people, because this will be made public, the findings of so other people. Then they go to the blue loans, and the Development Bank of Seychelles is itself a partnership. The Development Bank of Seychelles is a partnership between the government of Seychelles, the AFD, which is the French development agency, and the private bank, Standard & Chartered Bank in the UK, an multinational bank. Itself is a partnership. So there's partnerships all along. So then, if through the grant, it finds out, yes, there is a market, this is what I'm going to need, this is the training I'm going to need, then they can go and seek a blue loan, which is cheaper than a loan in the commercial banks. But also what happens with the blue grants, when it's announced, you compete for the grants, they provide, it's announced on social media, in the normal traditional media, they provide training to anyone who wants to learn how to prepare a project. This is at the cost of the trust fund. They reach out to youth groups, they reach out to fisherfolk. They say, it doesn't matter if you don't know how to write a project. We provide training. And if you find that you can go into a small business, especially SMEs, further along the line, they can provide training into the management of SMEs. How do you have a bank account? How do you manage? So the government is just in the background as this enabler, using funds that are not government funds. This is debt relief funds that the government cannot touch. And so make sure that accessibility, irrespective of your level of education, irrespective of where you come from in the community, you have access. All you have to do is step forward. Plan it all the way through.
Thank you, Ambassador. Riyad, I've noticed your hand raised.
Thank you. There is one element also on our side, and that I mentioned previously. To be able to attract private sector is to support government to put in place regulatory and institutional framework for the blue economy. So you need to have the vision, the policy, and the strategy. And that's what we are currently doing through our SIDS offer, to support government to adopt a blue economy policy, reviewing all the regulatory framework in order the private sector to be dynamic. So we create the environment. So the government is creating the environment in order to be able to attract the private sector, local private sector, but also international private sector. The international private sector is the one who will have the role of catalyst to the domestic private sector. So for us is one, the regulatory and institutional framework. Second is the de-risking part of the work. Thank you. We don't hear you.
Thank you. Rookie mistake. Thank you, Riyad. It is the evening of technical hitches, at least evening by Maltese standards. Karen, so I was mentioning that you are typing the answer to the question being posed in the chat box, and that is whether there is opportunity for funding the mangrove awareness on a national level, and perhaps you would like to link it up also to the contribution that the private industry can have within the context of partnerships for the blue economy.
Sure, and I was just going to type that, we are focusing on one national project at a time at this point, but I would be happy to discuss discuss the whole matter of mangrove awareness and how Seacology might be able to support that. And in terms of partnerships, I mean, Seacology is unique in that we raise every penny that we end up granting, so we are partnering with philanthropic institutions, with some corporations. We have one major corporate donor, and as well as individuals in the private sector who are interested in supporting island conservation. We also cover such a broad range of habitats and the types of projects that we support that we have interests from all over the place. And in terms of our partnerships on the islands, we really try and focus on what the communities want, having it come from the communities, having the process be very accessible to all communities, regardless of their status. So yeah, I don't know if that addresses the question at all, but we have partnerships on so many levels and we don't work a lot directly with governments, but we really try to foster good communication, transparency, and just try to really respect each country's way of doing things, which is quite a challenge when you're working in so many countries, but we try.
Definitely. Thank you, Karen, for that. So unfortunately, time is running out and we are drawing this session to a close. While taking this occasion to thank you all for joining us, we trust that you will be walking away from this webinar feeling more inspired and perhaps more conscious of how powerful and effective partnerships in the blue economy are. I would actually dare say even the mindset, as clearly we're seeing from the examples of all the panelists here. As the African saying goes, even though it has been attributed to many people, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. We now invite His Excellency Walton Webson, co-chair and permanent representative of Antigua and Barbuda to the United Nations, to deliver his closing remarks.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. It's been quite an interesting and very informative discussion this morning. So, Excellencies and colleagues, distinguished friends, ladies and gentlemen, I know we are over time, so I will not be very long. First, on behalf of the permanent representatives and the permanent missions of Antigua and Barbuda and Malta, we, as you know, stand as the co-chairs of the SIDS partnership. I want to thank you for joining this webinar today. We thank the panelists for really very, very informative discussions, the resource persons for providing their valuable insights and sharing with us. Through your participation, colleagues, this webinar was indeed an opportunity to present, promote, and to explore successful partnerships and partnerships frameworks with impressive results, what we heard from so many speakers. The programs or projects that were discussed today have been successful in encouraging economic growth and economic activity, in prioritizing the protection of and promotion of the marine resources in our islands, and will provide an appreciation and allow us for the food and the security of the marine life that we have around us. We all seek to establish similar programs and partnerships for the benefit of our particular and respective island nations. And we are looking for some of these partnerships that are already experiencing the collaboration with island nations to join with us. I am grateful that we had a broad cross-section of contributors from the private sector, the United Nations system, and from territories themselves. I'm very pleased to hear from my friend Ambassador Jumo and the work that has been done in the Seychelles. I'm very pleased to hear the UNDP work and the extensive work that they're doing. I just wanted to indicate, Riyadh, in your next time you use the video, you should try to get some voice over so it becomes a little more inclusive, so that I could follow the outstanding work in it and others like myself. This is very, very important as a whole for SIDS, the whole discussion on the blue economy, the whole question of building partnerships. That's why we are here with this partnership group with Ambassador Fraser, my friend, and why we are putting so much emphasis on this. We want to thank the Center in Malta for sharing their experience and allowing us to use their experiences and to see, so that we can see what is going on in other member states and other partners. We're ensuring that all stakeholders, through this kind of discussions, including indigenous people and local communities, and that's why I was so impressed with Ambassador Jumo's work and the UNDP's work, that local communities are engaged. Because without the local communities, we can repeat challenges that we have had in the past in development opportunities that have been exploited in the many islands. Through these discussions, I am also reminded that it is critical to ensure the sustainability of our policies to advance the blue economy. We were very pleased to hear about the efforts with the seagrass and the efforts with the mangrove. And because to sustain that is part of our sustainability in marine life. The work on dealing with plastic waste that UNDP is doing with the Maltese is another example. Our actions are already causing irreversible damage and impacts which can compromise future use of our marine space. So we must ensure that the best practices and available science guides our blue economy development and all our blue ventures. As we all still grapple with managing the recovery and the impacts of COVID-19 pandemic, we must ensure that we leverage the full scale of our resources available to us as we work towards recovery. The blue economy provides us one such opportunity for SIDS to align ourselves with investments in recovery with our sustainable development aspirations and climate targets. This, my friend, is an opportunity that should be utilized strategically, balancing short-term impacts with long-term development priorities. I close once again on behalf of the SIDS partnership, on behalf of my colleague from Malta, Ambassador Fraser, to once again say thank you for all of your participation. Thanks to the panelists, thanks to the colleagues from the United Nations system for participating with us, for we believe this is yet another step on our journey towards helping SIDS to materialize our objective in the utilization of the resources that we have and that we should benefit from. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. And once again, I'll ask all the panelists to smile. We're going to be taking a screen grab. That should, just a second. That is done. We will be circulating the panelists' presentation to all those who registered to the webinar. And we thank you once again for your participation, and we look forward to seeing you again in September for our next webinar on renewable energy. Thank you and good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
And I'm sorry, Riyadh, for the presentation. It was an evening full of technical glitches.
No problem at all.
We need more resources.
Thank you very much for all.
Thank you, Riyadh.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.